Hey guys, Merry Christmas. I don't usually say that. Of a different religious persuasion. Happy Hanukkah. I'm here with Marc Caputo.
Hi.
You're joining the Bulwark on YouTube. As always, do subscribe to the feed, click subscribe, share, give a thumbs up to the video. The algorithm rewards that. Marc, I think this might be your last YouTube video for the Bulwark. How does that feel?
I think it'll be the last for now.
For
Uh,
now. Yeah,
so,
right.
a little,
As a member of the Bulwark.
yeah.
Or we
So
might get you back in 8 months. We never know.
it depends on my social media habits, I guess, right?
I think it's appropriate that for the last one with you as a member of the Bulwark for now, we're going to talk about Matt Gaetz, Florida man on Florida man crime here. Yesterday, we got finally the long anticipated House Ethics report. What did it show? Were you surprised by anything?
I wasn't really surprised by anything. It was just what makes it so damning, politically speaking. Legally, it's not damning because statute of limitations of these various crimes have told, or to the degree that there was sex trafficking. The report makes pretty clear that the alleged victim doesn't think she was sex trafficked and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So let's just put out the legal argument. Let's just talk about the politics of it.
He was not charged for a reason, right?
Yeah, he was not charged for a reason. I mean, generally prosecutors are going to charge when they have enough evidence to have a reasonable likelihood of a conviction. And statements from the alleged victim and then the relative lack of evidence for a number of things just make that essentially impossible.
And statute of limitations, yada, yada.
Statute of limitations are told, so he allegedly had sex with her at least 2 times when she was 17. In 2017, the House Ethics report says that this was statutory rape. In Florida, we don't call it that. But if you're over 24, you have sex with a 16 or 17-year-old, there's a 3-year statute of limitations. So that told 4 years ago, right?
Right.
But put aside the legal stuff, the political stuff, what makes it so damning is there's just so much detail in there. And, most people are going to find this off-putting, gross, unbecoming of a House member. In fact, that's kind of the ultimate charge in the House, conduct unbecoming of a House member. He's paid tens of thousands of dollars to women with whom he had sex. Many of them say they feel they were paid to have sex. He says, no, I didn't do that. It was kind of a generous boyfriend kind of thing. Yeah. You wind up in these sorts of areas. But, that old phrase when you're explaining you're losing, when you're like, oh, no, I wasn't paying these women for sex. I just happened to have sex with these women and then pay the money. That's difficult. Yeah, there was ecstasy, there was cocaine use.
It's like, who hasn't? Obviously, you're paying for something. Let's just say that. Okay. Going on.
Well, I remember years ago when I first wrote about this in 2021, I interviewed a lawyer about seeking arrangement, which is the platform that a lot of these women came into Gaetz's contact or orbit from. Yeah. And the lawyer who does prostitution-related cases said, well, all relationships have an exchange of something of value. Right. What's to say? So, you wind up in these sorts of gray areas. But what's not a gray area is that most of this stuff is generally found to be off-putting by most people. However, as the story that I published, that I wrote, points out, is, in normal times, this sort of 33, 34-page report detailing alleged statutory rape, paying for sex, cocaine and ecstasy use, a variety of conduct unbecoming of a House member would have been like the final coffin nail in a politician's casket. But these are not normal times, and this is not a normal state in Florida.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's like we're in this political era where, this type of personal activity, and in some cases, sometimes political activity, can be turned into not a virtue, but a martyrdom, right? Like you can say, oh, well, look, I'm not that person. This is what Gaetz is saying. I'm not that person anymore. And the fact that they are releasing this report, the fact that they even investigated me shows that I have, rankled the right, I've pulled the right levers. I've, pissed off the right people. Right. They're trying to get me, and therefore everyone else should rally behind me. And frankly, that has shown it can work. It doesn't always work, but it can work.
I'm going to read this from the story. Ryan Tyson, advisor to Ron DeSantis. He was the coordinator for polling for Elon Musk's super PAC that aided Trump. He said the political culture in this country has become much more secular, but the press still tries to treat it with the sanctity and purity that our primary voters no longer seem to. There's a sense of pearl clutching by the media that voters don't get, and people don't believe the media like they used to. And I'll bet if we tested this, and he means like poll testing and focus grouping, more primary voters than you think will say he's married, he's moved on, and this is a political hit job.
See, okay,
that's why he said, I think Matt Gaetz is not done.
Yeah, and so I agree with the conclusion. I don't know if I agree with how he reaches it. I don't think necessarily that the press is pearl-clutching. I think the press covers this stuff because it's salacious.
Definitely.
It sells, it clicks. Matt Gaetz is, whatever you think of Matt Gaetz, it's totally an interesting personality, interesting to cover. I don't think the press is being sort of Puritan about it. I think they're being opportunistic about it. I think why it worked in the past, weirdly enough, is that it was the politicians who were Puritans about it. And often it was, the religious right that was Puritans about it. And that's just not really the case anymore. I mean, obviously, a good chunk of the religious right of the evangelical community decided that they were comfortable with Donald Trump, a huge chunk of it. And I think they've come to some sort of agreement internally where they are fine justifying personal behavior if the policy ends are within their wheelhouse, if that's what the policy ends are. And so I think, yes, I think there are avenues for people like Matt Gaetz to now have a future in politics, as outrageous and salacious as this report is.
Right. I think
Do you disagree?
No, I think what we could call that is with Trump is the Cyrus theorem, the King Cyrus idea, where you heard evangelicals talk about this, like, look, King Cyrus freed the Jews, and he was a pagan, but he was an instrument of God. And now Gaetz hasn't Gaetz hasn't gone that far, but
just give it time.
Well, what's interesting is like Trump has appeared in these different scenarios where he's surrounded by preachers who put their hands on him, speak in tongues. They do that. Gaetz hasn't done that yet. He's been pretty, even from the get-go, he was clear to a degree, saying, look, I had a wild past. I was a young man. I had a lot of money. I spent it on girlfriends. I did a lot of things. So he was never, the only thing he denied clearly was having sex with a minor when he was an adult and paying women for sex. And we'll let folks read the report to decide whether he's telling the truth.
Right. So in Florida, let's talk about Florida specifically, because your piece makes the case that this is kind of an ideal state to a degree for him to make a political comeback. And let's just set the stage. He's already hinted that he is considering a run for governor. Ron DeSantis is in his second term. And or a run for senator. They're filling Marco Rubio's seat with a special election, but that person has to run again in, if they choose, in 2026. So there are races that Matt Gaetz can run in this coming cycle. His father is well-known political loyalty in the state.
Yeah. He's, by the way, he's running for Senate again, state Senate.
Yes, so he's back in the ring. But there are other, prominent Republicans. It's not a small bench in the state.
No.
So what is the realistic path here when you talk to folks in the state?
I mean, the most realistic path is that Donald Trump, speaking of laying hands, lays his hands upon Matt Gaetz and endorses him. Right? That is still perceived as rocket fuel.
I mean, I guess because Trump values loyalty, and there's no more of a loyalist than Matt Gaetz, right?
I mean, think about this. Assuming the versions, plural, that we've been told and triangulated are true, Donald Trump on his airplane on Trump Force One decides all of a sudden to chuck every possible person who could be attorney general and says, Matt, I want you to be attorney general. And Gaetz allegedly says, I'm not confirmable. Like, knowing this is out there. And Gaetz, or Trump allegedly, is like, no, you're my guy. You're going to go in there. And so Gaetz is like, okay. So just like if you've seen All Quiet on the Western Front or any World War I movie, he picks up the standard, gets out of the trench, and
but
goes
that
and
didn't
charges
go very
the entrenched
well.
position, and he gets mowed the fuck down, right?
Yeah, that did not go well. So maybe Trump's mad about that. But if it was Trump's decision, I guess it's his fault that it happened. But it's pretty wild to nominate someone with that.
It was
for the top law enforcement job in the country.
And one of the things that I didn't put in the story is some of the folks in Trump's orbit had theorized at the time that the real problem with the report wasn't the he said, she said over whether he had sex with a 17-year-old, whether he paid for sex. It was the drugs. How are you going to be the top attorney general candidate when it's pretty clear there was a lot of illicit drug use going on, and not just
he was
weed.
doing Molly, he was doing coke, he was doing weed.
Florida man.
He was
Florida
in it.
man. He was Florida man.
What drugs was he not doing?
Yeah,
that's what
I don't think he was doing Flocka. I don't remember that from years ago. But there's like weird zombie drug. But one of the things that apparently when Gaetz dropped out, as we mentioned in our story, he didn't exact nor ask for a promise from Trump to endorse him in years hence.
Right.
So he'll have to come back and humbly ask.
Okay, so back to the point. So Trump could endorse him, and that would probably pave the way. But absent that, what do you think? Is it easier to run as a Senate candidate or a gubernatorial? I have my theory.
I think it might be easier to run. The thing is, I don't know. I go back and forth about this. I'm just trying to think about how the money works. So on one hand, if you're a federal candidate, you cannot coordinate with outside soft money groups to get tons and tons of money in.
Right.
If you're a state candidate in Florida, you can. So I cannot tell if that would be beneficial for Gaetz to run for federal office or for state office. I find it difficult to believe that Gaetz's wife, Ginger, who is a very, very cosmopolitan woman, would want to live in Tallahassee, but I also understand she doesn't want to live in Washington. So maybe this is all for show because he has a One America News Network program.
Where is that going to be based?
Pump it up, right? He just needs like attention.
So my theory of the case is that he'll probably stay in Florida. The reason being that easy to raise money. I think he recognizes that it's, yes, he wants to, he's threatening to upend every member of Congress's personal life now as retribution. But I actually don't think he wants to go back to Congress. I think that would be, it might be fun to be the pain in the ass for a little bit and a rebel rouser for a little bit. But do you want to live that life for years upon years upon years? I don't know. It seems like at some point the shtick gets a little old. And finally, I think, I do think that he's pissed off a lot of other Republicans in D.C. And they will not, I don't think they're going to be oh yeah, come and join us. I think they'll actively try to thwart him. And I think they look at it and say, this is Florida's not really in play, but if ever there was a candidate who can make it in play, it could be Matt Gaetz. And it's not just the drugs, honestly. I think if you read the report, you come away with it feeling really sad and kind of disturbed for the women in this. Many of them were in need of cash. They clearly were taken advantage of. They found themselves in bad situations, often drugged and intoxicated. And I just think that is not, maybe I'm living in a different political universe. But I do have to believe there are laws of gravity still. And I think that is problematic in a federal campaign. Maybe it's not in Florida. Maybe it's not in Florida with Donald Trump and his blessing. But I do have to believe that this stuff still matters a little bit on the edges. So that's why I think a governor run is more likely than a Senate run.
Some of the readers who despise Matt Gaetz and view him as a cartoonish two-dimensional figure are not going to like this. But having covered Gaetz when he was a state legislator, I can tell you that in addition to being and having the reputation of being a hellraiser and a party boy, he was also a serious legislator who
100%,
he liked passing legislation. He liked the process. He was one of the first kind of right to try legislators. And in the Republican caucus in Florida, he was an early supporter, no shock here, right, of medical marijuana and marijuana legalization.
Right. He's got these interesting issues, Eric, and he's can partner with Democrats on issues. He's got this antitrust element to him. And so, there are elements of seriousness in that shell of ridiculousness.
Where I was going is that, to your theory, and maybe you're persuading me that governor is more likely, is governor also is an attractive job for him because he would have the ability to do things. If you actually want to put your stamp on things instead of just being one of 100 mini presidents running around I'll filibuster this, the 100 dwarves of the Senate, you actually have an opportunity to do something. And I think that would be attractive to it.
Yeah, I think that's so. Well, it's been fascinating to watch. I do think there's more than two dimensions to the guy, although I think he's, he obviously went through a very troubled period of his life. But I do think if you actually talk to him, there is some depth that kind of escapes people who just see him in this, ridiculous portrayal.
But he put himself in that. He put himself in that role.
Yeah.
So when he first got in Congress in 2017, he clashed early on with Kevin McCarthy, and he was basically told, "Look, get in your place. You're a nobody. You're a backbench freshman member of Congress." And at the time, he realized, like, you know what? I can't pass any legislation. I can't have any influence. The only influence I can have is being a MAGA warrior on Fox.
Right.
And thus the Matt Gaetz that the nation knows was born.
So I will say this, like, when he was nominated for Attorney General, obviously it was outrageous, and we now know how the degree to was outrageous. But when he talked to Democrats, one of the things that kind of popped up a lot, which I thought was really interesting, was they were both offended by it, but also worried by it, because they viewed him as a fairly respectable tactician, and they thought of him as like a shrewd political operative for all the outrage that he generates. And for that reason, I don't think we've heard the end of Matt Gaetz. I think there's an insatiable appetite for the limelight, but also a real skill set that exists within him. So I will be curious to see his next chapter. I will be less curious to watch you chronicle it for another outlet, but I will unfortunately have to do that. Folks, Marc Caputo is done as the author of MAGAville. I want to say thank you, Marc. It's been awesome. I wasn't going to give you kudos, but it's been great, and I've had the time of my life editing you. Follow Marc when he goes to Axios, but don't follow him too far. Stay with us mostly. We'll see you later on here on the Bulwark YouTube. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.